Hello and welcome to Lost in Sci-Fi and Fantasy. I'm your host Leo, and today we are talking Grave Descend by Michael Crichton, writing as John Lang. Now, this is a book that, and kind of a series I've kind of wanted to talk about for a little while now. Now, obviously last year, kind of around this time, maybe, well, no, a bit earlier, I did, or was it this year? At some point, I did a bit of a Michael Crichton marathon where I read and watched a bunch of Michael Crichton's stuff. Now, it kind of happened unintentionally, but yeah, things tend to just happen sometimes. Now, this book is part of a series of books that Michael Crichton wrote under the pen name John Lang. And it fascinated me. So the first book that I actually ever picked up from this series was Zero Cool, and I'll probably at some point come back and talk about the other novels, including Zero Cool at some point. But I do have to kind of warn you guys that these aren't very good. They're okay, they're not terrible, but they are what they are. These are pulp novels, essentially. They're novels that you kind of, you pick up at an airport because you're going to the beach, or you know that the flight's going to be very long, or you're going to be on a road trip for a long time, and you just need something to occupy the time. This does that beautifully, to be honest. And it's fascinating. Now, each of these books has kind of the lore of the series written on the back of it to let you know like where it came from and why it says Michael Crichton writing as John Lang. So, it says, long before he wrote Jurassic Park, before he scripted blockbuster movies like Twister, before he created the groundbreaking TV series ER, Michael Crichton was an honors student at Harvard Medical School, and writing paperback suspense novels on the side under the top-secret pen name John Lang. Lang wrote 8 books between 1966 and 1972, and then vanished. Until 40 years later, after John Lang was born, Michael Crichton chose Hard Case Crime to bring him back, personally re-editing 2 Lang books, and even writing new chapters for one of them. Now Hard Case Crime is proud to bring all of John Lang's work back into print for the first time in decades, and the first time ever under Michael Crichton's real name. Now, the story for the pen name is actually on, I believe, Michael Crichton's website, but it's also on Wikipedia. And it is very interesting. So, Hard Case Crime is a publisher that kind of deals with, well, these kinds of novels. Their whole shtick is crime novels, or classic, detective-y, noir-y, crime-y novels-y thing. That kind of thing. And they do a good job with what they do. But, yeah, so going into the further lore and digging into it, you actually find that Michael Crichton's timeline isn't so cut and dry. It's not, he enters medical school, and while he's in medical school, he writes these books. It's a little bit more complicated than that. We dig in a little bit, just to get a little shovel out and dig a little bit with, and look at his Wikipedia, and we can see the list of things. One, he wrote under 2 additional pen names, Jeffrey Hudson and Michael Douglas. Now, this is kind of the early scale of his career. So he is in medical school. He writes 4 John Lang novels and 1 Jeffrey Hudson novel. The Jeffrey Hudson novel is his novel A Case of Need, which is... Now, I've read a little bit of it. I need to properly sit down and read it at some point. But it is basically about abortion. All the way back in 1968. So, it was very, early in the discussion there. And I found it, at least the bit that I was able to read, pretty interesting. Now, that has since been re-released under Michael Crichton's name completely, doesn't even say, written as Jeffrey Hudson or anything like that. But yes, supposedly, that is the first novel that Michael Crichton wrote where he felt that there was an actual possibility of, like, he saw something in the writing and saw that, he could make something of actually writing novels, which is why in the following year, not only did he release a book, Zero Cool, the first of the John Lang novels that I read, but he also released The Andromeda Strain, the first novel that he was willing to publish under his own name. And I actually quite like Andromeda Strain. It's a pretty dry book at times, as it's mostly scientists just running around doing science stuff for most of the book, but there is a nice suspense to the novel, and it keeps going. It keeps it interesting. But after this novel, he continued to write some pen name novels. So he wrote The Venom Business, Drug of Choice, and Grave Descent and Binary under the John Lang title. Though supposedly one of them has been re-released by Michael Crichton himself in 1993. I don't know. But yes, though one book, Dealing, is the one that he wrote under the pen name Michael Douglas with his brother, Douglas Crichton. So that is all of the pen name novels. After this point, the same year that he released Binary, which I believe is listed under the... Yeah, it's listed under the John Lang books and part of the hard case thing. He might have re-released it as himself in 1993, but then still gave it over to Hard Case Crime, maybe. But anyway, after this, he releases his second novel under his own name, The Terminal Man, which we have talked about on this podcast before, as well as the movie of it. And then he also released some books and movies around this time. But that's pretty much, from there, it's like, and the rest is history, because we obviously know what he did from there. He filmed a bunch of movies and wrote a bunch of books, and sadly passed away in 2008, and has released 4 posthumous books, and 1 sequel written completely by a different author. Kind of like what they're doing with Agatha Christie of late. His most recent book actually released this year, 2024. It's called Eruption, and it was completed by James Patterson. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of James Patterson, so I've been kind of staying away from the book, but I'll probably pick it up just so I have the complete collection. There's still a few books I believe that I'm missing, but I'll have to create a list and actually double check at some point. But yes, with that said, that is kind of the history of like Michael Crichton's pen names, which I find very fascinating and very interesting. But I also take it as, like, if you are wanting to write, but you're kind of scared of putting your name out there, pick a pen name. And then just write what you want. Or just write utter drivel that you feel will sell, and you just don't have to put your name to it. That's also an option. It'll get you started, at the very least, in writing. But anyway, that aside, my personal history with this series, as I said, I started with Zero Cool. So I found these books in a used bookstore, and I was, confused and whatnot, because I was like, okay, Michael Crichton, but writing as John Lang, what the hell does that mean? And I was like, okay, so he used like a pen name, and then you read the back and you're like, oh, so he just wrote trashy novels to get through college, and this is what he decided to do. According to one, supposedly he released the statement of how much he made off of one of the books was like $1,000 something, which at the time made him, like, in counting for inflation, would be about $13,400 something today. And like, that's like, like, that would be a pretty good paycheck, for someone who's just going through college. Like, that would, like, for me, that would have covered most of my college debt now. Like, yeah, that would have been great. But yeah, so I found it very fascinating, and I read Zero Cool, and I was like, that was okay. It was fine. Basically, Zero Cool, I can't even remember what the whole, like, thing is, but most of the time he seems to follow the same kind of basic template, at least from the 2 books I've read, which is Guy, in exotic location, gets pulled into weird events and must solve crime. And that's pretty much it. In this particular case, let me read the back of the book, the very short blurb that describes what happens in the story. Diver James McGregor is used to exploring sunken ships, but there's something strange about the wreck of the Grave Descend. No one aboard tells quite the same story about what happened. Then there's the mysterious cargo they were carrying. In one of the most beautiful places on Earth, a sinister plot is about to unfold, and if McGregor's not careful, he may find himself in over his head. That is the thing. It's literally, he's pulled into a thing, and something weird is going on. Now, this book, being as it is a kind of pulpy action suspense novel, is all about, well, I would say it doesn't really have the effect that you might think it should, that being in suspense, as it literally goes from beat to beat, doesn't really give you time to think. It runs super fast. It hits the ground running and then just doesn't stop until it hits the end, which arrives a lot faster than you think if you flip to the back of the book and you're like, okay, so that's how many pages are left. No. So in this book, at least in my copy of this book, if you did that, you would have 204 pages, and you'd be like, okay, cool. Like, I don't know who any of these people are, but yeah, they probably get introduced, and there's probably a lot of people, et cetera, et cetera. But then I was flipping through the book, and I noticed that it ended a lot earlier, actually, because I came across and I was like, oh, what's this? It's for more suspense from the author of Grave Descend, The Venom Business. And it's read on for an excerpt from Venom Business. And I'm like, okay. So the book ends at 166. That is almost 40 pages less than I thought I had to read. Like, at the time, I was like, okay, I need to get to the halfway point by Friday so that, on Saturday and Sunday or something, I could, catch up and finish. But then I looked and saw that. I was like, oh, I'm way past the halfway point, and I just need to get closer to the end now. Whoops. So yes, let's go ahead and kind of dive into the story of this book. Do I recommend it? Only if you like these kinds of novels. And honestly, only if you're going on vacation or you just need something to turn your brain off to. Because that's what these kinds of novels are for, is you just turn your brain off and you're like, yeah, that makes sense, I guess. So, as it kind of says in the little blurb, we follow James McGregor. He is a diver living in Jamaica, and he has been called in by a man named Wayne, or his last name is Wayne. Now, Wayne has a bit of an issue. Supposedly, his brother has been having an affair, and there's been a bit of an accident. Now, no one got harmed, but he lost his yacht, the Grave Descend. It sank. Luckily, no one was harmed, but they want to know what happened to the ship. And they're willing to pay McGregor a pretty decent amount of money in order to try and raise the ship. It's a nice ship. Find out what happened, bring the ship back up. That would be nice. And he shows McGregor charts of where it went down and, maps of the ship and everything so that he knows to, go through and look at the stuff. McGregor accepts the job and heads off to kind of start figuring some stuff out. And also start assembling his crew. As the next day they plan on doing a flyby in order to see, what's going on. Now, McGregor is actually kind of skeptical about what's going on with the Grave Descend, as things don't quite feel right. One, the map showing where the Grave Descend went down is a little too precise. Usually, according to him, when he's given a map of where a sunken ship should be, it's kind of a general circle that they have to kind of go over to find what sank. In this case, it was a cross, marking an exact location. That's a bit suspicious. So, him and his partner, his girlfriend or at least casual fling, they go and investigate the spot of where the grave descend is supposed to have sunk, to find the grave descend not sunken. But they also notice that the manor that's supposed to be owned by Wayne's brother is currently occupied by someone who steps out and hits a button on a remote and sinks the grave descend. So pieces are starting to fall into place, because the overall plan that Wayne had pitched, because of the fact that the ship was carrying his brother's mistress, they needed to stage a bit of a fake rescue in order to try and make it seem like she was never on the ship. That's kind of the main cover-up that they're going for. And the way that they plan on doing that is by saying that the ship sunk the following day from when it actually sank, in order to have it to where she's been checked into the hotel the entire time, and so on and so forth. But yeah, with this, they find, oh, the ship was fine, but now they're sinking it. So then they have to go, and he decides to go and start investigating further. He talks to the ship's captain, who gives a statement, and he talks to the woman, the mistress, to see what happened. And then eventually, when he... Basically, they fuck with him for quite a while. They give him slightly mismatched stories. He ends up, I believe, sleeping with the woman, the mistress. For some reason, it's one of those fade to black scenes, and it's heavily implied that he slept with her. And he sees that the name on a ticket that is leaving earlier than they said that they would be leaving is a lot sooner than they had said that they were planning on leaving. And then he at one point is also tailed and forced to stay in stay in the hotel as everyone else. He's also threatened by a mysterious figure who, as he waits, turns out to be the guy that hired him. The mysterious figure states, like, oh, you should get out of this now. They plan on killing you, etc., etc. And it's the guy that hired them. So it's like, okay, weird. But yeah, as time goes on, he starts setting up potential, like, backups. He has his friend that he's known for a long time start looking into things, and he starts putting together backup plans. Like, for example, he finds out that the ship, even though they've claimed that it had its check, never had its check. So he goes on the dive. They go down and they look at the ship, and they're like, yeah, there was a very obvious explosion, and it was not some kind of malfunction. It was a very controlled and precise explosion to blow out the side of the ship and harm relatively nothing else. Then he goes through, and before he dives, he's told by Mr. Wayne that he needs to try and find a statue, and he needs to try to find a safe. The safe should be relatively small and easy to get out, and the statue should just be somewhere around in the stateroom. So he goes through, finds no statue, but he does find the safe, but it's bolted to the floor. They go through and look through the rest of the ship, and as they're waiting, they hear like a hum. So he goes to investigate the hum, and he finds some big-ass explosives. So he returns up to the ship, and they have lunch. He's talking, and he says, like, yeah, no statue. And Mr. Wayne's like, it should be down there. Just check every room. Check the whole ship. Just try to find the statue. And then he's like, but what about the safe? He's like, oh yeah, the safe, it's there, but it's bolted down, and it'll take a long time to try and get it out. He's like, don't care, do it. And he's like, okay. So he goes down. He gets the safe up. He checks every single room. Doesn't see jack shit. He, I guess, at some point disconnected the explosives while they were doing that, and then before they left, reconnected the explosives. And once they got out, they took the safe, and then, as they're leaving, boom, the ship explodes. Who would have seen that? So, now the ship has been destroyed. There's not really much point going back down, but they schedule a go down to try to find the statue the next morning. But As they're heading back into town, they get robbed by 8 people with machine guns. And, whoops. Wayne gets injured, and McGregor takes him to the hospital, where he's then taken by police and questioned. The police kind of hem and haw about whether or not they actually believe him. Ultimately, they let him go, and he runs into a woman that he actually met a bit earlier in the book, who has, like, these ocelots. And he's walking with her, talking with her, and then all of a sudden he gets knocked out and spirited away to what an area of Jamaica called the Pit, which is a swamp area with a lot of alligators or crocodiles, or what was it? I think it's gators. Yeah, I think it's gators. But anyway, he's like, oh, they're trying to keep me here, overnight, and then I'll have to trek my way out in the morning. Because they left him with a compass and everything. And he's like, fuck that. And he starts hiking in the middle of the night. He ends up coming across the town, taken back to the main town that I think it's Casa de Ocho or something like that. But he's taken back to town. He gets back to his hotel room, orders some room service and whatnot, and then he ends up talking with the police again. The police come in, as the man who brought him in immediately reported him to the police, because they're like, it's weird for a mud man to just kind of appear. So they went to the police. He's like, fair enough. So he is just they're casually talking. He had found that the pieces of the statue, like the statue had been broken up into pieces and hidden in his bathroom. And the police are like, okay, so you believe you're being set up, etc., etc. He's like, okay, well, you've already been officially, quote unquote, arrested, and you're in a high security prison in Kingston as far as anyone knows. So you have 48 hours to fix this. So him and his friend go and stake out the place, where they see that his kind of maybe girlfriend is at the manor, because supposedly she went to go find him and got kidnapped. And she's now being used as bait. So he goes in through the front door and talks to the main guy, and the whole plot is actually then revealed. So there is no Wayne. Well, there's no, I believe his name's Arthur Wayne or Andrew Wayne, something like that. He's not real. But the other guy, the Richard Wayne, that's supposed to be the brother and whatnot that owned the yacht and everything, he is real, but he's an elderly man who is like in a care facility because he had a heart attack. No, the people that they are talking to are Robert Levine and his brother. I can't remember his actual name, Levine. The mistress is actually that guy's wife. The woman that raised ocelots, she's actually his Robert's wife, and they all, like, he's a money fixer who brings in what they call black money and make it white spendable money, and that's his job. They had screwed over the mafia and were doing this whole thing to try to throw them off and try to point the mafia at McGregor so that they would, focus on that. Now, they had also, so the empty chest, the robbery that they had staged, or kind of staged, was the mafia trying to take what was stolen was diamonds. So it was the mafia trying to take the diamonds that were supposed to be hidden in the statue, or they were hidden in the statue, but they were making it seem like they were in the safe. But then they broke the statue and whatnot, placed it into McGregor's room, took the diamonds, and hid it in the ocean in a reef with a tracker on it so that they could try to find it again. They needed him back here anyway, so they were like, yeah, this works out fine. We were using her as bait because we knew that you would come. You would also bring your friend, but you would then send your friend off. He's going back to this place, so we sent people there to jump him. Classic evil guy shtick of mwahaha, we've already anticipated all of your moves. Mwaha. So they take him out to do the dive, and he gets the diamonds, is attacked by a hammerhead shark, but he took the explosive charges out of the spears and, also the tips, and just kind of kept the shark off away from him, so he doesn't actually kill the shark, which is kind of nice. But he keeps the charges for later, just in case he might need them. And they go back. They start luring in a ton of different sharks because they very obviously plan on throwing him into the ocean. They give him a room. He lights a cigarette, puts it near the windowsill. His guard gets shot. He jumps out the window after lighting a fire and putting the charges in the fire. And he lands in the pool. And then it's a big action sequence. He goes, finds his kind of girlfriend. Her name is Sylvie, I believe. And they go through and start trying to plan stuff. Or try to escape. But, they meet every other character that they've come across in the book. His friend comes in to rescue him. They fight their way through, and they're just about to, make their way out when his friend is supposedly shot. His kind of girlfriend gets stolen or taken away, and then he is led off to a cliff to be chucked in the water. But then his friend wasn't shot, shoots the bad guy. He ends up falling into the water, gets eaten by sharks, at least half eaten by sharks, and then we kind of go into the wrap-up. It's a very fast wrap-up, where it turns out that his kind of girlfriend was actually working with him the whole time, and now she's just out there somewhere. Supposedly she took the plane at 6 a.m. that day, and she's gone. And yeah, basically a thing that was kind of left out was the fact that he was at her apartment when he got the call. And he's like, yeah, I'm relatively easy to find. I'm in the phone book. But it would have to be, like, someone who knew a lot about me to know that I would likely be there at her apartment. So he figured that someone was working with these people and tipped them off to where he would be. Because this book was released in the 70s, or specifically 1970. So, yeah, with that, there's also the massive warning of there's a lot of sexism and weirdness going on, but it is kind of weird that this is the second of these novels in a row where the main kind of love interest double crosses the main guy in the end, and then I think it's also the second one in a row where she just gets away and just disappears. At least I'm pretty sure that's how it happens in Zero Cool as well. But it is like a weird pattern so far in these novels, and I'm curious to see if it continues when I read them. But yeah, that's the book. He goes off to him and his friend are going off to try and get the diamonds that spilled into the ocean after the guy was shot. As he told the police and whatnot that the current there is terrible, they probably got swept away and they'd be impossible to find. But his friend was like, but it's super calm there. And he's like, exactly. So I'm going there to get my payment because there was no reward for what we did. And he's like, okay. And McGregor says that he's going to quit the diving business. He gives it to his friend and he's going to go help with like a bar or a hotel or something. But yeah, that's the end of the book. It's overall fine. It's interesting. It would have been better as a movie, which I think is the case for a lot of these. It's supposed to be like a movie in book form. Supposedly, one of these books actually was, like, the movie rights were sold in the 60s, but nothing ever came of it. I do kind of wonder, like, what happened to those movie rights, and I'm curious whether or not you could potentially buy the movie rights to this stuff. Because while they would be kind of cheap, schlocky movies, they could also be made pretty cheap, too. So, I mean, for, like, a bit of a, like, cheapy action movie, like, I've found, especially this past year, that a nice kind of cheapish action movie, I kind of like. They're kind of fun to just kind of sit there and watch. I watched the movie Freelance when it came out, and that's pretty much one of these books made into a movie, essentially. Just cheap action that kind of just goes, doesn't stop, and then, boom, it's done. Another one... What's another one? I mean, Free Guy is kind of that, but a lot more comedy-y. And there's a few that are coming out soon that I'm planning on watching that just seem fun. But the thing is, it's kind of weird to read it. Because you're like, I'd rather watch this, like, because then you could just properly turn your brain off. Because it's really hard to turn your brain off with a book. Like, you can kind of do it, but you still have to, at least on some level, focus because you're reading. So it becomes a lot harder to just fully disassociate while you're reading it. But a movie you can just sit there and zone out, and then like your brain could turn off for like 30 minutes and then turn back on, and you'd be like, yep, there's still explosions going on. And you'd be happy. But yeah. So with that is that. Updates for like the challenge and whatnot. Things haven't been progressing super hard because, as I've said before, the challenge has technically failed, and I will be doing a proper episode. Like the next proper episode, we'll be discussing that as well as talking about VR stuff because I've been playing a lot of VR. Obviously, because I bought the headset, I'm gonna get my fucking money's worth. And overall, I've been enjoying it. I was surprised at how kind of used to it I got. And how not terribly, like, motion sick. I didn't get motion sick. I was surprised by that. And overall, it was a fun experience. I mean, I did have some moments of, like, whoa, because I actually started playing a game where I had to move. But for the most part, it worked out pretty well. Like, especially like when I was sitting down, everything worked out pretty fine for that game. Because in that game, you can sit down and move around, and it's pretty fine. I'll talk about it more when I actually do the episode. And by then I'll also have probably played more stuff. But yeah, overall, that is that, I think. Next week is going to be a little bit complicated, to be honest, because I start my job this coming up week. So it'll have to be a movie of some sort. But which one, I don't know at the moment. I will think on that. And then you guys will see it eventually. But with that said, though, thank you guys so much for listening. If you guys liked this and you're watching/listening on YouTube, feel free to give it a like, comment, subscribe. Or if you are listening on any podcast catcher of your choice, feel free to rate and review it and share it with your friends. But with that said, thank you guys once again so much for listening. I will talk to you guys next week. Goodbye.